Hi, I'm Joyce Harper, Professor of Reproductive Science at the Institute for Women's Health at University College London. Welcome to Season 3 of my podcast, Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This? This season, we'll be diving into topics that explore how to achieve good health and happiness. I'll be speaking with leading experts who will provide evidence-based advice and debunk some of the many myths around our health. Additionally, I'll be having conversations with individuals who bring unique perspectives through their lived experiences. In Season 3, we'll cover a diverse range of topics, including reproductive anatomy, inspiring female icons, chronic health conditions, factors that influence our well-being, and global women's health issues. I really hope you enjoy Season 3 of Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This? Welcome to our mini-series on female icons. Today we're diving into the stories of incredible women who made remarkable contributions during the World Wars. I'm in conversation with Clare Mulley, who is an award-winning public historian, author and broadcaster, primarily focusing on female experiences during the Second World War. Clare's most recent book, Agent Zoe, The Untold Story of a Courageous Second World War Resistance Fighter, is the critically acclaimed biography of the only woman to parachute from Britain to Nazi German-occupied Poland. Previous titles include the award-winning The Woman Who Saved the Children, about Eglantyne Jebb, founder of Save the Children, The Spy Who Loved, a biography of the first woman to serve Britain as a special agent in the Second World War, and The Women Who Flew for Hitler, which tells the story of Nazi Germany's only two female test pilots. Clare's books are widely translated and have been optioned for film and TV. Clare regularly appears in the press and on TV. Welcome, Clare.
Hello, lovely Joyce.
So, Clare, I always start by asking my guests about their lives and career. And can you tell us why you chose to share the stories of remarkable women from wartime history?
Yes. So I am a historian of women in war, particularly the Second World War, but also touching slightly on the First World War. And I came across the story of a woman from Shropshire who was absolutely remarkable and fantastic. And she was arrested. She conducted her own defence in court. She was found guilty on technicality, but morally, I think she'd won the case, because at the end of the case, the Crown prosecutor came up to her and pressed the sum of her fine, which was only £5, the absolute minimum. She could have been given a prison sentence, or £5 for each one of the humanitarian leaflets she'd handed out. And so she'd done really well. And then he came up to her and he took out his wallet and he unfolded one of those big old £5 notes and pressed it into her hands. This is 1919. And sort of saying, metaphorically, I will pay your fine. You've won the moral case as far as the prosecution is concerned. And she said, no, thanks very much. I can pay my own fine, thank you. But I will take your £5 and put it towards a new cause, the cause that she'd been lobbying for, to help save the children in continental Europe at the end of the First World War. And that became the first ever donation to Save the Children, the charity. So I used to work at the charity Save the Children for many years. And I thought, why do we not know this woman's story? She's fantastic. She went on to do so much more. And she was a romantic novelist. She hated children individually, never had any of her own, which I love. She called them the little wretches. She was gay. She had an affair with John Maynard Keynes' younger sister. She was just fantastic in so many ways. And then the bank in Britain said, look, we're going to do new currency. We're going to have a new £20 note and a new £2 coin, and we want to put a woman on it. And they asked the public for suggestions. So I was going, Eglantyne Jebb, this woman who saved the children, as my first book is called. And of course, they didn't write back. They did the new currency, and there was a woman on each of them, but it was Jane Austen on both the note and the coin. And I felt it was like saying, I love Jane Austen, but why put her on both? Do we not have any other women that deserve some recognition? So I thought, well, why do we not know about Eglantyne Jebb? So I decided to write her story, and I didn't think it would get anywhere. I was doing it evenings and weekends while having my own kids, and I halfway through thought, I better do an MA in social history, because otherwise I could write a really bad book, and she really deserves a good book. So I did an MA, and 7 years later, this book came out, and fell off my chair because it won the Daily Mail Prize for Biography. And then I got an agent and I got going. And that's how I started.
I love that. And that really is so apt, because we're talking in this mini series about female icons. And the reason I wanted to do this series, and when I first started a women's group here back 8 years ago, I asked the women what we wanted to talk about. And one of the first things we talked about is the lack of female role models and female icons for us to look up to. And we all know Jane Austen, but we don't know about the amazing women you've written about. Why do you think we've overlooked all these other amazing women over history?
Well, it's a massive question. Of course, women have always been there. And I think a lot of it is just pure sexism. I mean, it was only, I think it was 10 years ago now, probably, that one of our leading TV historians said, if you want a real history of Britain, it's a history of men, because they were doing everything. And it's just like, oh, okay, hang on a minute. Or if you're talking, Henry VIII's wives, they're accessories to the fact. It's like, oh. So, of course, women have always been there, and partly they've been social history, but actually they've been involved in a lot of key events. They've had agency throughout history. They've made decisions and choices. And I was fascinated about why we don't know these stories. And particularly, I was focusing on the stories of women in war, partly because Eglantyne Jebb, the woman who saved the children, she was inspired because she'd gone out to the Balkans in what became, just before it became, the First World War, and worked in the civil conflict out there as a humanitarian. But there were there's no eyewitnesses to her. Sadly, she died in 1928, and there are family members, and I had some wonderful sources, but there was no direct contact. So I moved forward a war to try and capture some of those stories, before the human coast erodes, to try and capture some of that. And it's been a real privilege to do that work. But while I've been doing that, I've discovered all sorts of things. So one of my books is called The Women Who Flew for Hitler, about the only two women who served as test pilots for the Third Reich. Hannah Reich is quite well known, fanatical Nazi, brilliant pilot, first woman in Germany to fly a helicopter, first person to fly a helicopter inside a building, the great Deutschlandhalle that was built for the Olympics in 1936. Ended up in the war flying the Me-163, so that's the rocket-powered aircraft, and later on the V-1, one of the very few people in history it's a prototype cruise missile. So she flew one of those. It's the Doodlebug, or the Buzz bomb, that we knew was coming down in London and Portsmouth and our main industrial cities. So she was an extraordinary pilot, but she was a fanatical Nazi. But the other one, and I hadn't heard of her at all until I started working on this, was Melita. And she was actually secretly part Jewish, secretly in the heart of the resistance, and involved in the most famous assassination attempt on Hitler. And these two women were working in the same airfields. They knew each other. I mean, they hated each other. They wouldn't even share a cup of tea. But they had a really big spat at one point, which I quite enjoyed retrospectively. But nobody had heard of Melita, and she's the more fascinating, really. She's the one that took the hard moral choices and really looked at things. And so I managed to track down her family, and they I arrived in Germany, their beautiful lakeside house, and there were 3 seats on one side of a table and a stool on the other side for me, and I was basically interviewed. But it was great. It was lovely. They went off, they made tea and came back with tea and cake, and they said, yeah, okay, we're going to go with you. So, and they opened up their family archive, and among them was a folder, a file, like an archive file, with loads of information on her. So I said, oh, why is this not with the men's papers that are mostly in the military archive in Freiburg in Germany? And they said, well, this is marked. It was marked on the top and basically said domestic, because she's a woman. The archivists back in the day had felt, well, she can't really have had any significant role. So they'd sent her papers back to her family. So women get written out even at the archive stage, not just at the books that publishers choose to write or to back. And even when these stories are being told, when we think about women in the special service, special agents, their stories are being told more, but they're still, there's better work being done now. I'm delighted to have some good female colleagues out there as well. But often they're still told in quite romantic terms. I wrote my second book was called The Spy Who Loved, about the first woman to serve Britain as a special agent in the war, Christine Granville, or Christina Skarbek, who was Polish born. And she was absolutely fantastic. In 1941, Hitler said that 1941, Churchill said that she was his favourite spy. And that was before she really got going. It's her work she undertook in 1944 that really makes her legendary in the Special Forces. But there wasn't a great, there was a lot that had yet to be researched about her, which was absolutely fantastic for me to undertake. Why am I talking about her now? I've gone off on one, as I always do.
They've written out.
I wrote my book. Yeah. So I wrote my book, and she achieved so much. So she, among her achievements, she was a courier, and she took the first microfilm across wartime borders at extreme danger. And eventually that microfilm reached Churchill's desk. And what it showed was the massing of tanks and troops on the German side of the then German-Soviet border. Basically, it was the first filmed confirmation evidence that Hitler was planning to invade Soviet-held territory. Because until 1941 June, Hitler and Stalin were allies. And it was only after that invasion that Stalin changed side and joined the Western allies. So I mean, hugely important information. She went on to secure the defection of an entire Nazi German garrison on a strategic pass in the Alps on her own, came down the mountain, saved the lives of 3 men who were due to be executed by marching in and basically terrifying the Gestapo leader into releasing them, and much, much more as well. So yeah, extraordinary story. I'm trying to focus on her achievements here. And after it came out, she became slightly better known. And I was delighted that she was included in a book, a collection, again, very well-known names, did a collection of famous stories in one book, and they included her. And the first line was, "We were drawn to Christina by her beautiful smile." And I was just like, what?
Oh, God.
We've all got beautiful smiles. Well, maybe we don't, but that's not the key thing here, the key thing. So I think we're quite good at remembering these women now. We're doing better, but we talk about their courage, absolutely right. We remember their sacrifice, and of course it's very important that we pay tribute to that. But then we tend to talk about their appearance. And a lot of them were quite pretty. A lot of them weren't. Actually, to be good looking was a disadvantage because it made their faces more memorable. So actually, to be plain is probably better. And these women were incredibly diverse. There were mothers, there were grandmothers, there were all faiths and none. So we had Jewish German women, we had a Russian-born Indian Sufi princess, so she's a Muslim. There were shop girls from Brixton, Anglo-French. There were, they're so diverse. One of these women, an American woman, had only one leg and a prosthetic leg, didn't stop her. So there's much more to remember than they had a pretty smile. And what we're not good at talking about is how effective they were and their achievements. So that is what I'm trying to focus on.
And it's so brilliant to do it for women from the wartime periods. But even today, the women that are doing amazing things in today's society, there's still, you see on social media, people are still saying about what they're wearing and how they've done their hair, which is absolutely ridiculous, isn't it?
I completely agree. I mean, there's so many resonances in the work that I'm doing, and some of them are very political, some of them are very military. My new book, Agent Zoe, about the only woman to parachute from Britain to Nazi German-occupied Poland during the war. She starts off, she's one of the very first women to actually take up arms in the Second World War. She's amazing. But her first role is to keep a route open in Lvov in eastern Poland, which is now Lviv in Ukraine, to get the Polish armed forces out so they could reconvene in France where they would be most effective. They got 350,000 troops out, their government, their treasury, quite a lot. And she's helping to keep that route open at the start of the war. And when I was researching it, I went into the kitchen and put on Radio 4, have some lunch. And there was a radio story about the Russian invasion of Lviv, the same city. And the women on Radio 4 were making petrol bombs in the basement of a school or something. And Zoe had been making petrol bombs in the basement of a sports hall. And, it's so relevant. The resonance of these stories is remarkable. And that's the same with all these gender issues as well. Yeah, so I completely agree. There's still so much we can take from this.
Yeah, I wish things had improved, but they probably haven't that much. Claire, you've got all these amazing stories that you've written so far. Now, how do you actually decide which one you're going to write about?
But I only do them one at a time. I don't have a deck of cards that I can pick from, sadly. I wish I had so many stories lined up. So it's all different. I mean, my first book, obviously, I used to work at Save the Children when I came across Eglantyne Jebb's remarkable story. So that was great. The second one was then The Spy Who Loved, Christina Scarbeck, Christine Granville. My agent, I got an agent then, so I was very excited. And he said, what are your interests? And I said, I'm a feminist. I want to, there's a rich seam of untold or poorly told women's stories. So I want to concentrate on that. And he's going, great. That's 50% down from the entire population. What else? And I was very interested in Poland because I had taught English as a foreign language. After university, I did a TEFL course and went off there as a volunteer with UNESCO and taught in a city called Bydgoszcz, industrial city, but an amazing museum with their history. And Poland has this extraordinary history, hundreds of years of being invaded and annexed and occupied, but of resistance and defiance and liberation as well. And of course, Warsaw, capital of Poland, is halfway between Berlin and Moscow, which kind of, is the political geography that makes it so interesting. So I said about Poland, and it was actually my agent that suggested Christina as a subject. And I actually said no. I felt, hang on, I'll find my own subject. Thank you very much. I thought it was a bit like a blind date. But I thought I should be polite because I'd only just got an agent. So I went and found out a bit about her. And yeah, I was completely blown away by her. So I knew I had to write that story. The Women Who Flew for Hitler, I was talking to a woman called Mary Ellis, she's a veteran of the war, sadly no longer with us, and she had served in the ATA, the Air Transport Auxiliary, which is actually largely men. I think we forget that. They're older men or men with some disabilities but still able to fly, but were taken off combat duty, and women pilots, female pilots. And her nickname was Spitfire Mary because she delivered 400 Spitfires between factory and airfield, but she also flew heavy bombers and things. And she had so many fantastic stories. She was just brilliant. And so I said one day, could I write a book about you? And she said, oh, Claire, I've just finished it. I was like, oh, no. I gave her a very good review in the Spectator, I think. But she said, oh, why don't you look at women on the other side who flew? So that's what set me off looking at the women who flew for Hitler. There were actually other ATA women. I think that's what she was referring to. Some extraordinary women like Beate Urs, who became Germany's first female multimillionaire after the war by setting up a chain of sex shops. But that's an aside. She's just a footnote. But there were only 2 test pilots. So I thought I'll focus on those, especially because you get 360 degrees, a complete fanatical Nazi and a resistor in that story. And then Zoe, I am extremely honoured. I'm literally honoured by the Republic of Poland after The Spy Who Loved came out about Christina Scarbeck. They awarded me a cultural honour, a medal, which is very beautiful and I like to wear when I'm laying a wreath or things like that. And I had to go to the embassy to receive it from Radek Sikorski, who was then the foreign minister and is again now the foreign minister, an extraordinary, brilliant man. And he was awarding me and 4 very tall men who had done other cultural things. And at the back there was various family members and things, and there was an old lady, very elderly, sitting down. I thought, well, she looks interesting, so I went for a chat with her. And she was a veteran of the Warsaw Uprising. Her name was Hanna Czarnocka, and also sadly not with us anymore. And she had served as a teenager running through Warsaw as it was being firebombed, incendiary bombs from the Luftwaffe, to try and get medical supplies to bring back to the field hospitals. And hers is a remarkable story as well. It's lovely. She was so courageous. She managed to find 10 glass bottles of methylated spirits from the university, which she could use as antiseptic. So she put them in a rucksack and was running back to the hospital in the basement of a building to give it a little protection. When she was hit in this raid, and literally shrapnel from falling buildings smashed into her back. But she was safe because she had these 10 glass bottles there. Only one of them broke. And then she said she had this strange sensation in a burning street of suddenly feeling cold as this meth soaked through her bag and through her shirt and into her bag. And she looked at me and she said, Claire, I knew I was going to die then because I was a petrol bomb. But she just kept running and she made it. She made it back to the field hospital. And all they said was, you've broken one of these. That was the conditions she's serving under. Anyhow, so I was like, oh, so humbled by her story. I later wrote a piece about her for History Today, I think. And she said, well, what are you doing here? So I just say, oh, I'm just, I just wrote a book. I didn't actually do anything. I just wrote a book about an amazing woman, Christina Scarbeck. And she said, oh, Christine, yeah, she was fantastic, wasn't she? But for goodness sake, why didn't you write about the real hero? Why didn't you write about Zoe? So I was like, oh, who's Zoe? So that's what set me up on that one.
Wow, that's great. I'm loving the thread through these stories. They're absolutely amazing. You have got a theme about war, especially the Second World War.
Yeah.
That seems to be something I can see how it sort of cascaded from that first book. Is that something you're going to stay with? Is it, or why is that interest there?
Yeah. Well, I think war is very interesting historically for so many reasons, and one of them is that war can subvert the usual gender structures. So you have this mass women moving into the workplace to replace the men that are going on the front line, but you also have women going out to serve with gun in hand. And in Britain, at the start of the Second World War, women weren't allowed to be armed. They could join the British Army, lots of drivers, sometimes under fire, courageous, lots of secretarial, clerking type roles, all sorts of medics and things. But you couldn't be armed in the British Army. So the female special agents that were sent out with Churchill's approval went with the SOE, Special Operations Executive, and they were transferred before they went out into the Fanny, the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry, which is a throwback from the First World War. The Fannies would go out on horseback, as in nursing yeomanry, to get the sick from the front line and bring them back to the field hospitals. So they were reconstituted in the Second World War, no longer with horses. And they were outside the British Armed Forces, but they're uniformed and highly trained. There are only uniformed military organisation like that outside the British Armed Forces, which meant that they could legally carry arms. So the women were sent out with the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry. And women were really important. They are important because they are women. Women serving in the resistance, in British special agents being sent out, women in the French resistance, in the Polish resistance. Their gender is significant, and it gave them a superpower that men serving in the resistance didn't have. And this is not to be a honey trap. This is not to flirt or to seduce the enemy. It's not that at all. It's that women, and arguably, Joyce, we still have this to some extent, it's that women tend to be overlooked and underestimated, and no more so than by the Nazi German forces in the Second World War. So there they are in occupied territory. They're lonely. They are part of this very misogynistic structure, and they need translators and they need secretaries in the occupying authorities' buildings, their offices, and they need office cleaners. And at first, they just didn't consider that women could be using their brains, overhearing conversations, looking at the papers on the desk and remember anything significant. So that right from the start, that was significant and important. And of course, the Germans did cotton onto this. And when they discovered women in the resistance, their response was invariably brutal. Women faced the same absolute threat. But the playing field's never level either, because they tend to be volunteers in these organisations, not given the same recognition. But later on, as the war progressed, of course, that gender relevance remains, because even when the Germans work out women are doing this, by a few years into the war, any able-bodied man moving around in occupied territory, particularly if they're a conscription age, are going to be vulnerable to searches. They're going to attract attention. Why is this man not either dead, a prisoner of war, or, and there were reasons. So there are some reserved industries, or if you're a doctor or, whatever, but they had to have all of the, possibly forged, but all of the correct papers to support it. But women, thousands of women, millions of women, are moving around the entire time. They're looking after their families, extended families that there's no breadwinner for. They're trying to keep businesses going. They've got jobs. And so they're moving everywhere. And even if you know that there are women in the resistance, it's a much bigger, pool to try and find them in. So gender is actually very relevant in the war. And that's part of what makes it so interesting, that women are given these opportunities. My Christina Scarbeck book, I used to say to my mum, who's very smart. I don't know if you've met her, Joyce. that, she yearned to be centre stage, and perhaps it's ironic that it's war that enabled her to take that role, albeit as a secret special agent. And my mum's like, well, of course, that's very, very suitable, isn't it, darling? And I was like, oh, why is that, Mum? I knew there'd be some reason. She came, well, centre stage, secret agent, they're anagrams. So, oh, okay. So there is a specific reason for looking at women in war.
Yeah, great. Now, when you've decided who you're going to write about, and you said that sometimes you're wonderfully presented with a whole file on them, but I'm sure that's not always the case. So how do you go about researching them? And were some of them a bit difficult than more of a challenge than others to uncover their story?
They're all massive challenge, actually. And I love that. I love the research part of it, the investigation. I mean, obviously, I read everything contextual, look in all those bibliographies. I spend a lot of time in archives, which I absolutely love. Often use the Freedom of Information Act in Britain to get things out of the National Archives that haven't been previously released. Usually they are still a bit redacted, there's black marks taking out various bits. And there's a murder trial. One of my women gets murdered, and I was the first person to get those papers out. And actually, they had the crime scene photos, which was pretty shocking. Which, publisher, we did think, should we print these? But I decided I didn't want to. I felt like she hadn't given permission for that, But obviously, I do spend a lot of time overseas. So I've written about a British woman, 2 Polish-born women, but one of them became British, 2 German women. And so I spend a lot of time doing what Antonia Fraser calls optical research. I love that phrase. It basically means going, I don't know if you can call it a holiday, but going out, spending any advance you've got from your publisher to try and see what evidence there is in situ. And sometimes that is archives over there, interviews, of course, with any surviving veterans. And I've been so lucky to interview so many French, Polish, and in fact German veterans of the Luftwaffe for my books. But it's amazing what you find. So family papers, but also my new book, Zoe, I flew out to Poland. I had a wonderful Polish translator. I had 2. This was a chat with me at the start. And we'd gone to see, our first stop was, he took me to the field where she'd parachuted in September 1943. And so we had a look at that. There's actually a memorial there, and we laid a wreath for those members of the Polish Special Forces. She was the only woman in the Polish elite Special Forces, the Cicho-Ciemni, or the silent unseen, it translates as. So we laid a wreath for those who did not survive. And then we were driving to Warsaw, and I looked on the map, and there was a convent there. And I thought, oh, well, I know that Zoe had to hide twice. I can't do all the stories, but anyhow, twice in the war she had to lie low in this convent. So I said, oh, let's stop there and have a look. It's a beautiful old palace, a white palace that had been converted. So we stopped, and we're looking in the gate, and it's still a convent, private building. And a nun walked past. It's quite cold. She had a thermos of tea. And she said in Polish, I'm sorry, this is a private building. Could you move on? And my translator said, I'm so sorry. I'm with this historian. She's just absolutely obsessed. And her name's Clare Mulley, but, I'll move her on. And she said, oh, Clare Mulley, we know Clare Mulley. And I just thought, I've never been to this convent before, and I'm pretty sure I've not met this nun. She said, oh, she wrote a book called The Spy Who Loved about Christina, who went to school as a little girl in the convent school here. And she's absolutely right, but it wasn't a big part of that book. But anyhow, so they bought the book. It was in Polish translation, and they loved it. And so they brought me in, and they introduced me to their eldest resident, Sister Janina, who is now their archivist, and had known the nuns who had hidden Zoe in the war, but no one had ever gone to find her before. So you never know where you're going to get these new stories. Of course, you have to sort of check them as much as possible in the archives. But so that's amazing. And for Zoe as well, I ended up interviewed a woman who shared a prison cell with her, Bernadetta. That was extraordinary. I interviewed President Lech Wałęsa, which was absolutely remarkable interview. Quite hard keeping him on focus, but he told me, how inspired they'd all been by the resistance leaders in Solidarity. And he had met her and known her. So, you do everything. You do everything as politely and persistently as possible.
Wow, that conference story is amazing. I got goose pimples when you said that. You must have
all the books have got a story like that. All the books have got a story like that.
I love them. And I've always wondered when people you see on TV, they sort of go off the real story quite a lot, but in books, I hope that people are a little bit more to the story. How do you balance the historical accuracy with the engaging storytelling, and you do it in such a vivid
Well,
way.
it's all historically accurate. I write non-fiction. I don't write novels, so they're biographies and history. So everything, no dialogue is invented. Someone gave me a review once saying the dialogue's really limited, and I was like, well, that's all we've got. It's in the letters or recorded calls or telegrams and things like that, diaries, of course. And when I started researching Christina, there were only 4 known letters in her hand, and there's now 12. I've managed to find more, which is great. And they do give a wonderful sense of her character. But yeah, so everything that I quote is actually from the archives or, from letters and so on. And they've got about 1,000 footnotes in my books because you have to kind of be quite careful. And tell you, when you're writing and researching, you've got to make sure you put down where you found everything when you do it, because otherwise it's chaos. So I found that out early on. Be very careful and keep your paper trail. So it is all, as far as I know, I've done my best, and I've worked hard to try and make it as accurate as possible. Having said that, I think these women's lives were not dull, and the books should not be dull. They do a lot of waiting around in between operations and so on, but the stories are extraordinary, and I wanted to reflect that. I want them to be page-turning. So I do try and write, popular history. There's a word for it: public history, popular history. Anyhow, something that's very readable history. And I am really pleased because Zoe, my latest one, has been longlisted for the Woman's Prize for nonfiction, which I'm absolutely thrilled about. It's also been shortlisted for a military history prize, and I just think that's what I'm aiming to do. I'm trying to bring together. My first 2 reviews were that military history magazine and the WI magazine, the National WI magazine. I thought, oh, great, they're my audiences, military history and just your average person reading, hopefully a book that's really engaging, also tells you something, but is not trying to bang you over the head with information, but is just trying to engage people with this extraordinary history and these really incredible and, I think, inspirational stories.
Yeah, I think you're doing such a great job. It's so, so important. I can think of several examples from your books, but one of them, because I read it most recently. So Agent So, you described what she was wearing when she parachuted in. How did you know what she was wearing? That was one thing I thought, is that true?
It's in the archives. It's actually that bit is in the British archives, because in Britain she joins the Chicka-Gemini, the silent unseen, and they are, SOE was helping to train them and fund them in Britain, and they're known as SOE's P section. P is for Poland. The most famous section is F section, of course, which is for France. So all of those files are actually over here, and there's some in National Archives, but also in the Polish archives over here. So we know exactly what she's wearing, and she was wearing a blue silk dress. And on top of that, she had a tightly knitted cardi and then an old Polish overcoat, all obviously Polish, that had been, refugees had brought in or whatever, so that she would look the part. And then on top of that, she had her parachute jumpsuit, which had a belt full of gold coins to give to the resistance. She had a shovel and a torch, a little compass. She had 2 revolvers, of which she said she was very proud, and she had a little tiny thing as well. She had a cyanide tablet sewn into the hem of her dress, I think, in case everything went horribly wrong. So she was fully equipped. But she's the only person to parachute, at least on record, from Britain to German-occupied Poland during the war while wearing a dress, because she's the only woman to go that way. And she had to wear a dress because as soon as possible you'd get rid of, the shovel is there to bury your parachute and your drop suit as soon as possible, so it's not found. And she had to disappear into the civilian population. And women in Poland are not wearing trousers in the 1940s, in the war period. So she had to be in a dress. She had to be in what she would be wearing as a civilian to disappear as quickly as possible. So even that actually had a military function in a sense.
Yeah, these women were amazing. I mean, if they were doing what they did now, they'd be amazing. They really were breaking the mold for women, and it's just so amazing. Do you think that these women that you've written about have influenced the role of women in military and intelligence today?
Yes, I do. But not just influence the role of women. So Christina Skarbek, for example, the stuff that she was doing. She was Britain's first special agent in the Second World War, and in fact longest serving agent, male or female, and among the most effective. And at one point, fairly early on, she worked in 3 different theatres of the war she served in. And the first theatre was Hungary, Poland, that area of Europe. And at one point, she is captured and she is taken for quite brutal interrogation. She's already ill. She's got the start of pneumonia or very, very bad flu. And she's got a hacking cough and she's quite weak and her temperature and she's shaky. And they manage to catch her and they take her off for interrogation. And she thinks, well, I know that she got not only herself but her boyfriend released. And so I went to the British files and all it said, Joyce, so it doesn't always help. It said, Christine showed great presence of mind and they were released. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Great presence of mind? What does that mean? Anyhow, luckily she did tell a few people. So I got this from various different sources, which usually, points to it there being some truth in it. So she bit her, she decided to make it a virtue of her apparent weakness. So she bit her own tongue. She had this hacking cough and everything. She bit her tongue, and not a little, but hard and repeatedly. And then when she coughed, it looked as if she was coughing up blood. Now, that is the symptom of tuberculosis, TB. And there was no cure in early 1941. And the Germans are rightly terrified of this disease. It's carried by waterborne droplets. So basically, interrogation and TB do not mix very well. So they threw her out, and knowing that the man with her was her lover, they thought he must be infected, just not showing the symptoms yet. So they threw him out as well. Now, I mean, the story goes on. It's amazing. They were followed. If I was them, I'd have got in a car and got across the border as soon as possible. One of the many things I like about them is that they just drove straight to a wine bar and had a drink and decided on their plan of action there. Anyhow, they managed to get away. Now, later in the SOE produced a handbook of tips for their agents to read before they went. And in that, they put at one point, if you were captured, you could try this ruse. What they actually say is you could bite your own tongue or gums. I've thought about it a lot, Joyce. I don't see how I can bite my own gums. I don't think it's possible. But anyhow, that's what it says. And I think they got this from Christina Scarbeck. They're always debriefing the agents and gleaning what they can. So she was, these women are changing or influencing policy and practice, even at the time, for men and women, not just for women. But yes, I think it has also influenced. Christina was taken on before the end of 1939. Other women aren't taken on for several years. SOE isn't even established until June 40, is it? So she in part, it's her example, how effective she was, that manages to make the case for other women to be taken on in this role later on. I mean, it's not the only reason, far from it. It's because they needed them, because women could disappear in a crowd more easily and so on, as I mentioned earlier. But she is this excellent example of a woman who's achieved so much in the role. And that is another factor that helps move this forward. So, yeah, they are influential.
Wow. It's mind-blowing, isn't it? Absolutely. Now you've mentioned quite a few of their really amazing parts of their stories of their life. Were there any stories that were particularly surprising or emotional that you haven't mentioned already that you found? There are probably lots, but if you had to pick, this is always a
There's
hard
so
one.
many. I've got 4 books out there. I'm working on the next one.
We're going to come to that in a minute. Yeah.
I mean, there's so many. I mean, I was constantly getting, like you said, goosebumps when I read some of these stories or found them. So for Zoe, at one point, Zoe is charged with she's the only female emissary, so that's a personal representative of the commander of an Allied army, as far as I have found. So she is sent as the emissary of the commander-in-chief of the Polish Home Army. That's their resistance force. As I said, they had 35,000 troops they took out immediately overseas. That's their first overseas army. There's another one later, after those people who've been taken by Russia are allowed, or those ones that are still alive, are allowed to return and form a second army. But they've also got this home army, their domestic resistance army. And she is sent as the personal emissary of the commander from Warsaw to London with 2 microfilm, one hidden in the shaft of a key and one in a little brass cigarette lighter. She has to travel across nearly 1,000 miles of enemy-occupied territory to Britain as quickly as possible. And she's got 2 missions to undertake in Britain, but maybe that's too much. Anyhow, so this journey, it's those, I'm seeing it in the archives. And I'm thinking, how am I going to write this? Because people, if it was a novel, it would be just like, it's so far-fetched, it's ridiculous, But it is all in there. So I've put it into this one epic chapter where she goes from Warsaw, just go first right into the heart of Nazi Germany, into Berlin itself, on false papers. It's just some drama there. It's a bit more drama. She gets to Strasbourg to cross the border into northern occupied France. She nearly gets bombed. Anyhow, she manages that one, and she gets to Paris, and she's travelling as a German oil company secretary on false papers. Forged by the Polish resistance. Her name is Elizabeth Kubitzer at this point, German name. Oil is obviously a war important industry, and she could be a secretary for that. That would explain why she was moving around. And so when she arrives in Paris, she has to report, as all German workers do when they arrive in occupied cities, just to report herself before going to her place of work. So she left it as late as possible, hoping that they'd just give her a cursory look at her papers and want to, shut up office and go home. So she arrives and she hands over her papers to report. And they said, oh, something about these papers. I don't know. They don't look quite like the others. And she's like, oh, okay. And they say, well, it's late. We want to get on. She's like, yeah. And they said, no, we're going to keep these overnight. You come back in the morning. You're going to take a room in that hotel over there, and we'll see you tomorrow. So she goes to the hotel. She can't, even if she wanted to, she can't flee back to Warsaw because they've got her travel documents. She can't go anywhere. And so she hides her key and her cigarette lighter. So even if she is caught, they won't get the information on there. She hides them. And then I don't think she slept at all that night, because she later told a friend of hers exactly what the wallpaper looked like. So I've been able to put in, she was obviously pacing around this hotel room looking at the wallpaper. And in the morning, she just had to steel herself and go back. So she goes back into the offices, and the clerk recognises her. Says, right, can you come around the side here? So she goes round, and they say, oh, here are your papers. They're such good quality. We wanted to compare them against this possible forgery over here from someone else. She's like, okay. And she just had to take the paper. She couldn't show any sign of relief. She couldn't laugh or anything. She just had to take them and get on with it to go the next step of her journey.
Oh my God.
And that's just one incident. She would say, she told friends later that she was often sweating like a mouse, which I love. I love as a phrase. I think it's a Polish phrase. I didn't even know my sweated. And here's one for you, Joyce. At one point, she's on a train, and the Germans are going very systematically carriage to carriage, and they're not just checking papers. This time they're checking bags and pockets and just doing a thorough search. And she's just one among many people, but she's very nervous because obviously she's travelling on false papers. She's got hidden documents, and she had to tell. She would flush and she would sweat like a mouse. So she's going red and she's flushing. So she picks up a paper and starts fanning herself, and she's hoping they'll think she's menopausal, which is one for you, I thought I'd mention. And because it's the only time I've ever heard reference to the menopause in Second World War history. And of course we were there. We were menopausal there as much as anyone else. So so she just sort of tries to get away with it. So there are so many stories, Joyce. I can't just pick out a few, but yeah.
Fantastic. That they were right not to approach a menopausal woman. I always say, if you want to get shouted at, I'm allowed to say that, I think.
Well, they did approach her actually, but she does get away with it. So yeah.
Good. I mean, if anyone listening hasn't read your books, you can tell from the way you're telling these stories, you're such a brilliant storyteller, Claire. It's just,
oh, bless you, thank you.
Oh no, it's just. I could listen to you all day, tell more and more stories about these women. And thank you for sharing the ones you've done so far. Can I ask, what's next? Are we allowed to know how far you are with the topic?
Not really.
No.
I am researching. So I'm under contract. I've got another book, which is great. It's very different to anything I've written previously. I'm always trying to do different things because it's more interesting for me, and I don't want to just retell. They all went through the similar training or whatever. I'm trying to tell different stories. So yeah, it's a very different story. It is another woman in the Second World War, but something that I've not done previously. And I'm quite excited and nervous about it. So doing the research now.
Wow, amazing. Claire, how long does it take you to write a book, one of these books, with all the research?
Yeah, it's all different, really. So the first one, evenings and weekends, while I had my 3 kids and did MA, that was tough. That took 7 years. And then Christina took about 4 and a bit years. And now I think since then they've been about 3.5 years each, something like that. So it's a lot of work and not a lot of money. But I love it. And, I'm above minimum wage. I'm keeping myself afloat here. And it has helped because I've got a couple of film options on the go at the moment, which is good. And, obviously I review and I write for the papers and do lots of pods and TV and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, if we worked out our hourly rate for anything we write, I think it would be below minimum wage, actually.
Yeah, you have to do quite a bit.
How are you going with the films and TV? And which ones are they?
So it's the first two. So the Woman Who Saved the Children, that's been optioned by an American company last year, and I'm really, really thrilled about it. So yeah, they're going through the trying to get script writers, or I don't know quite what stage they're at, but the script comes first, and then they'll try and get stars' interest, and then some more funding and so on. So, I mean, I think out of books that are optioned, apparently 7 in 10 are not made into films. I've only ever had options so far, but I'm delighted to have those options, and no film is made from a book unless it's optioned in the first place. So fingers crossed. But the others are all free. So if any of your listeners know of film directors, film production companies, send them my way.
One word of caution: the people I've spoken to whose books have been made into films, a lot of them have not been happy with how the remaking of the stories. We were talking about you keeping everything to fact. The poetic license.
Films are different. Yeah, I mean, a script is never going to. I've read a lot of scripts of my books because they've all been under option, apart from Zoe, which only came out recently. The rest have all been optioned at different times, and the options have expired, sadly. And so I've read quite a few scripts, and sometimes I haven't loved them. But I've always fed back. So now I'm always in as a historical consultant. It doesn't actually mean that I get my way. It just means they have to ask my advice now and then and don't have to take it. But it's as good as I get. But, the people that have optioned them now, I mean, I think they seem good people, good companies. It matters to me. I don't mind at all if these are, dramatized to some extent. They're going to have dialogue that is not just the dialogue that are in the archives, of course. So I'm totally good with that. Sometimes they need to be truncated. Some of these stories are extraordinary. Christina Scarbeck served in 3 different theatres of the war. Well, did they want to do the middle one? Well, I don't know. Zoe, I mean, her stories are absolutely extraordinary from start to finish. You couldn't put that into 3 hours, actually. Might be good as a TV series. That'd be good. So yeah, of course I understand that. And actually, sometimes I've been asked, would you want to write the script? And I don't want to. I think the people that write scripts, it's a different skill. I want someone experienced doing it. And it would break my heart too much to cut out huge chunks of it and change things around, elide characters or whatever. And I appreciate that has to be done. But I do think they have to stay true to the basic history, the character of the person. Make sure that we are talking about women with agency. They are, after all, special agents. If you take their agency away, they're not that special. And not women who are rescued by fellas. There are some basic things. Christina's part Jewish. I think that's really important. That's in there. Zoe's is very, very much a Polish story. You can't make her an American. There are fundamental things that I will insist on. But yeah, it reaches a new audience, and hopefully people read the book afterwards. So.
Yeah, hopefully. And I've been the last 3 films I've seen actually have all been about iconic females. So from the film Joy to Madame Clicquot, and the third one is going to be on this series as well, which is the young woman who swam the sea. No, The Young Woman and the Sea, the book and the film are called. So the first woman that swam the Channel.
Right.
Yeah, it's good that those films are out there. So we need your books.
Yeah, exactly. Lee was very good. What's her name? Kate Winslet, is it? The other Kate. Anyhow, Lee was very good. I would recommend that about Lee Miller, excellent World War II biopic. So it can be done well.
Yeah, for sure. Now, we're at the end of the questions almost. So, Claire, I've called the podcast Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This? And I asked my guests about if there's anything that people have said to you. I didn't know, I didn't know that. Why didn't I know that? So probably for you, with these amazing women you've written about, lots of people say, why didn't I know
really?
that?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think I've been writing these books for nearly 15 years now, and I feel like, oh gosh, I pump it out on social media, and I give talks at festivals a lot, and I do a lot of podcasts, and I just think everyone must know it now. I've been going for a long time. And then I did a podcast recently called We Have Ways. It's We Have Ways of Making You Talk. It's a World War II podcast, and it's two friends of mine, James Holland, World War II historian, and Al Murray, who's the pub landlord, but also a World War II historian who's got an Oxford history degree. They're both great. So they said, oh, I think we should cover the women. I was like, yeah, you should. So they got me in, and I did the structure for a three-episode series. And that went out, and they've got a massive listenership. And afterwards, so many people got in touch saying, we no idea any women did any of this stuff. And I couldn't believe it. I barely scratched the surface. So my amazement was how little, after 15 years work, I'm obviously not doing that well, how little people know this history even yet today. But the response was all positive. They said, oh, you actually need to come do a lot more, because we could only curtail it in 3 episodes. We could only do so much. So there is interest in it, but it amazes me how little known the real stories are.
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you for writing these brilliant books. So everyone needs to go and read Clare's books right now if you haven't, and hear more about these stories of these amazing women. So brilliant work, Clare, brilliant. And just to finish off, I ask all my guests, I'm a little bit obsessed with happiness. So I've been asking all my guests from the beginning of my podcast, what makes them happy and where is their happy place? So Clare, what makes you happy in your happy place?
Reading, walking, talking, eating, films, I guess. And my happy place is my kitchen, my sister's kitchen, my friends' kitchens, Lucy's kitchen, and any archive, and just getting out. I love going out and doing the research. So when you're going to travel and you don't know what you're going to find, and you're nervous in case there isn't enough for a book, and you've bought a lot of train fares or whatever. But I love going out and doing all that. And then my other happy place is this one that you can see. This is my study at home where I do all my writing. So, yeah.
Fantastic. And I'm it's a shame that I'm not sitting next to you, but I just didn't want to.
I did invite you, Joyce.
I know. The complications of tech, and I often have troubles with this tech, and I don't know. I'm the producer and writer and everything, so I just didn't want to. Anyway, we've done it. We've done it.
Yeah,
and the very last question to you, Clare, I've asked everyone this as well, which is a little bit off topic, but it's just a fun thing to end a podcast. Have you got advice you would give your younger self?
Oh, a bit. I'm very lucky in that I'm happy where I am now, doing what I do. And I'm a bit worried, that butterfly wing, if I gave myself some advice, I would actually mess it all up and I would end up not doing this and being really unhappy. Obviously, everything's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So I think I'd rather not. I've been through some terrible times and, things have been really hard, obviously, but okay at the moment. So I'm just going to stick with how they are. I'm a lucky woman and yeah, don't want to be too smug about it. I'm touching wood next. It's all going to go to pot tomorrow. But I think I make my living doing what I love, and I've got a nice family, and I've got a study of my own. I've got a room of my own, as Virginia Woolf once said. So I'm just going to stick with it.
I love it. That's a great message. So Clare, Clare, thank you so much. That's been absolutely brilliant. Well, people won't know this, but I've known you for a long time. I think the very first time we met was when we were both doing careers talks at our kids' primary school, and
goodness, to think that. I hope I was doing it when I worked in a charity and not for being a writer. But
I don't know. It must have been. No, it must have been. I don't know actually. It probably was over 15 years ago. My eldest is 22, so I'm not sure. But we blinked and our lives went by. And thank you for all this brilliant work in highlighting just some of the many, many women that have done amazing things during the war. Really, really brilliant.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me onto your pod, Joyce. And normally we only ever get to meet. We meet occasionally in the pub, which is obviously a win. But quite often we just meet on a train to London, don't we? So it's good to do something different.
We do, and I've been very lucky that through the years, sometimes you've pitched ideas of your books to me, and you helped me a lot with my last book that I wrote, and gave me some brilliant advice. So,
Oh,
thanks very much
oh,
for that,
amazing.
Claire.
Good. I'm very pleased.
Thank you.
Excellent. Pleasure. Thank you very much. Cheers, Joyce.